Hi and welcome. I'm Becca from The Happy Ever Crafter, and I'm so excited you're here to learn the basics of calligraphy with me in this workshop. I've designed this workshop to be jam-packed with like the most thorough, hands-on rundown you could possibly get in as short of a time as possible so you can be off to the races quickly. Because if you're like me when I was starting, this has probably been on your bucket list for a while and you're finally doing it, so like, let's go already. But seriously, I'm gonna walk you through everything I would do if we were at an in-person workshop together. That being said, my workshops are usually at least 3 hours long, and this one is only about half of that, so what we're doing today is gonna go quick. Luckily though, it's a video, so you can pause and rewind as much as you need to. After this workshop, my goal is that you'll feel confident that you haven't missed any steps, which I definitely did when I started, and that you have like a well-rounded understanding of exactly how calligraphy works and the path to learning it really well. You'll understand all the concepts after this, but you're not gonna magically leave here a calligraphy pro. I'm not gonna lie to you. I just wanna set that expectation up front. It will require a lot of practice, but I will explain exactly what to do as your next steps to practice and to get there. So small spoiler on that note, the next steps I'm referring to will actually include a bunch of more advanced workbooks that I have for you. I'll talk about that a whole bunch later, but for now, let's actually get into it. So a little rundown of what we're actually gonna do step by step in this workshop. First, we're gonna talk about supplies. We need to know about supplies to actually use them. Then I'm gonna do a little bit of a posture lesson and we'll do a little bit of a warm-up together. Then we're gonna talk about how to actually hold them and use them properly. And then we're gonna go through the meat and potatoes of this workshop, which is what I like to call the drills, but you may have heard them called basic strokes, calligraphy strokes. This is like the creme de la creme of what I'm gonna show you in this workshop, and it'll blow your mind if you've never heard of it before. Then I'm going to give you a basic rundown on how to make letters and how to connect them into words. And lastly, I'll explain what my recommendations are if you hopefully enjoy this workshop and you're like, heck yes, that was fun. How do I practice more and where do I get more? Sound good? I'm going to pretend that you're like, yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so if you have your workbook in front of you, on this page, there's an intro page here where you see my silly face, but then on this next page, there's a whole checklist of what we're gonna go through for this workshop. Before I talk through each item though, I do wanna address an immediate concern. If you can't get everything on this list right now, don't bail on this workshop, stay here. You can do the workshop even if all you have is a pencil and some lined paper. Pencils are soft enough that you can mimic what we're gonna be doing with brush pens, so if that's all you have, use that and try this out, and then you can investigate getting more supplies later. Let's talk about the ideal scenario of things you do have for this workshop though. So number one is a pencil. Like I said, you can use a pencil for this whole workshop if you want to, but even if you're not, I want you to have one handy because we're gonna use it for some warm-ups together. Realistically, any pencil will do, but ideally it's an HB or softer, meaning HB, 2B, 3B, so this is a 3B. The B stands for blackness, but you can also think about it as like the softness of the graphite. So soft is good for what we want to achieve here. Okay, next up is a brush pen. For this course, we're using brush pens. There are other options for modern calligraphy. You've probably seen pointed pens, which are gorgeous too. But brush pens are a great and accessible way to get started with this with a lower barrier of entry. There's no ink, there's no dipping, there's no nothing, you just take the cap off. So to talk about brush pens, let's actually flip to the next page for a second, which is where it says Choosing Pens 101. There are a billion different brands and types of brush pen out there. Obviously, for the purposes of this short workshop, I can't give you super specific recommendations about brands because it depends where you are in the world and what you can get. So instead, I'm just gonna encourage you to use whatever you have for now, and that will work for this workshop as long as you understand the two main things about brush pens. First, it has to be flexible. So if you look on the page here, you can see that when I push on the pen, it flexes. If you're using a pen that's not flexible, the tip of it won't bend and it's not gonna give you those thicks and thins that you're looking for in modern calligraphy. So like in a nutshell, it has to be a brush pen, not a regular pen. So look for the word brush. You could also look for the word food, F-U-D-E. In Japanese, that means brush. So a lot of Japanese brush pens will say that on it. That means it's flexible. You could also just look for the word flexible. Any pen that is going to flex when you push on it will give you those thicks and thins. That's basically rule number one. The second thing is that there are, in general, two different sizes of brush pen. So these are my two favorites for each size. This is what I'm gonna be using in this workshop. This is the Tombow Fudenosuke, and this is a Tombow dual brush. And if you look at them, Hopefully you can see that on the camera. If you look at the tips of those, you can see that they're completely different in sizes. So it's really important to know if you're using a large brush pen or a small brush pen, because generally the workbooks that you're using are going to be scaled for those brush pens. So the one I'm using here is scaled for small pens. You might have noticed that there's 2 download options for this workshop. There's a small pens and a large pens workbook. So you choose those based on the size of your pen. This is a small pen, this is a large pen. They're very different. So if you tried to use a small pen on a large pen workbook, it would be tricky, and vice versa. So small pen, large pen, and you need to have a flexible pen. Those are basically the 2 rules for brush pens. The third thing you're gonna need is tracing paper. Tracing paper is the easiest of all the supplies, to be honest. Any art store will carry this, and it's pretty inexpensive. So the goal is that you're basically just gonna be able to put a piece of transparent paper over top of your workbook and trace through it, so that you'll have the guidelines from the workbook, but you'll be able to keep your workbook fresh and clean for reuse as many times as you want to. Tracing paper also tends to be less harsh on your brush pens for practice, so it'll keep your brush pens feeling healthy for longer. Personally, I'm going to be using marker paper. Marker paper, tracing paper, in my mind, very, very similar things. If you can find marker paper, even better. It generally tends to be a little bit smoother than tracing paper, but it's also a little more expensive. So tracing paper, marker paper, whatever it is you want. This is Canson marker paper. That's what I'll be using, but it really can be any brand you find. Okay, and lastly, of course, you're gonna need your printed workbook. So there is a free one that comes with this workshop. If you haven't figured it out yet, that's what I've been showing. The link to download yours is actually right beneath this video on this page. There are 2 versions, like we talked about, one for small pens, one for big pens. So make sure you've downloaded and ideally printed the corresponding workbook before we get started. You're gonna wanna pause this video after we finish talking about supplies if you haven't grabbed your workbook yet. A couple of points right before you do though. If you're using a pencil, instead of a brush pen, use the small pens version of the workbook. And when you're printing it, don't worry about the quality of the paper you're printing on, because we're gonna use tracing paper or marker paper over top anyway. However, if you don't have tracing paper, you will wanna print the workbook on as high quality, smooth paper as possible so that it works well with your brush pens. I know this probably sounds confusing, but basically either you have whatever paper workbook printed and you'll put tracing paper over top of it and not write directly in it, or you're gonna print your workbook on high quality paper and write directly in it. It's up to you. And then of course, as I said earlier, make sure you know what size of brush pen you're using, whether it's a small pen or a large pen, and use the corresponding workbook for that size of pen. So long story short, for supplies, a pencil, a brush pen, large or small, a tracing paper or marker paper, and your printed workbook, period. Or again, if you don't have access to those things, just a pencil with ideally as soft lead as possible and some lined paper. Just make sure it's lined or graph or dot grid or something. You're gonna want those guidelines to keep your writing straight. And then if you don't have the workbook printed, just reference it from your computer or your phone or whatever device if you can't print it. Okay, now would be the time to pause the video if you do not have your supplies ready and if you do not have your workbook printed, and go get them all ready before we move on. Once that's all clear and sorted though, we're finally ready to get into some of the actual writing part. Okay, for this warm-up, you're gonna need your pencil, whichever one you've chosen, hopefully softer lead like we talked about. And you're gonna need the page in your workbook that says warm-up exercises. I'm gonna put a piece of tracing paper over mine just to keep my workbook clean, but you can do it right in the workbook if you want to, totally up to you. Now, when it comes to posture, you will likely hear a couple different things from a couple different instructors, and that's fine. To me, there are just a few key things that I'm going to tell you that are my biggest piece of advice, and then I want you to adjust your posture however it works for you. So in this workshop, posture likely won't be a huge factor since we're just sitting here for, 90 minutes, and we're not doing anything rigorous. But as you get more advanced in your calligraphy and you sit for a really long time, you might notice that you get some aches and pains. It might be your back, it might be your shoulder, it might be your arm. If that's the case, then that's when you'll need to take a bigger note of your posture and adjust what isn't working. But for now, I just want to give you some general notes to keep in mind. So number one, sit at the edge of your chair. Don't have your whole butt on the chair because that's going to be more likely that you're going to slouch. So right now I have my whole butt on the chair. I'm going to just back it up a little bit and move forward. So I'm sitting more at the edge of my chair, and that naturally makes me sit up straighter because my back is not touching the back of the chair. So sit at the edge of your chair. Number two, put both of your feet on the floor. Personally, I tend to always have one crossed over the other. Not a good habit for calligraphy. So keep both of your feet on the floor. It'll distribute your weight better. Number 3 is the height of your desk versus the height of your chair. Ideally, if you're sitting up straight, your elbow should just graze the edge of the table like mine is right now, without having to hold your elbow up really high or put your elbow down really low, because you want this to be at a height where you're not naturally going to slouch over and your elbow's not going to hit if you're trying to keep your arm nice and loose. So if you're sitting up straight, your elbow should just, ow, that kind of hurt. If you're sitting up straight, your elbow should just graze the edge of the chair. The edge of the table. Number 4 is the paper angle. So adjust your paper for whatever's comfortable for you. And that might mean that if you're sitting straight to the table like this, your paper is turned so that your arm feels comfortable. Maybe it means your paper is straight like this so that your arm is comfortable. Maybe it means if you're a lefty, you have to turn it totally the other way. Play with whatever paper position on the table feels comfortable to you. I don't want you to like lock it into one place. So let's say we're working at the top of a page like this and my arm is comfortably placed and I'm feeling good. Nothing feels tight. I'm just working at the top of the page. And then as I move down towards the bottom of the page, I've completed this whole worksheet and now I'm closer to the bottom. See how my arm scrunches up against my body to try and get this spot on the page? What I want you to do instead is find where your hand is comfortable, where you're not like tensed, and move the paper instead. Move your paper to where your hand is comfortable. Generally you can do you can move it a little bit for a couple of lines, but once you start noticing that it's getting tight, move your paper instead of moving your hand. That's a nice little tip for you. And then lastly, for posture, think about your forearm as kind of the spot that touches the desk and that kind of anchors you, but the rest of your arm and shoulder and hand and everything being able to move freely. You don't want to plant your hand down and not be able to move it. Your goal is to be relaxed and movable in your movements. Movable in your movements. That makes sense, right? But truly, you want to be movable in your wrist, your arm, your shoulder. You want to be able to move around as you're working, as opposed to just planting down and leaning on your hand and really putting a lot of pressure on it. So what I like to do is keep kind of this part of my arm on the table or even just on the edge, and then I can move my shoulder and move my hand and my wrist as I need to. Okay, so now that you're situated, let's go back to the warm-up exercises page, put our tracing paper over top. This is something that I did in the first ever calligraphy class that I took with Joanne of Hey Jo Girl, and I remember it being really, really useful, so I still use it in my own workshops as well. So first, what I want you to do is hold your pencil with your natural grip, however you naturally hold your pencil. The reason I say that is because a lot of the time when I bring up this warm-up, I have students who will kind of hold their pencil really loosey-goosey at the top like this and just not actually hold it how they normally would. So hold your pencil how you normally would. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna do loop-de-loops like this on your page, but as lightly as you can. So from where I am, if we were at an in-person workshop, if I was sitting across the table from you, it would be so light that I could hardly even see them. And realistically, you probably won't be able to see mine right now on the camera either. So really, really, really light loop-de-loops. And you can experiment with making them bigger and smaller, remembering what we talked about with posture, keeping your arm loose. So if you've done them all the same size, try doing some a lot bigger. Try doing some a lot smaller. Just really, really, really light on the page. And you'll notice if you move a little bit if you lose a little bit of concentration, you'll get some harder spots, or you'll kind of lift your pencil off the paper a little bit and not make any mark at all. So we're really trying to kind of find that balance. Just kind of warm up your arm with really light movements. So fill up that page. Okay, now if you're writing directly in your workbook, flip to the next page so you have a blank page. If not, you can keep your workbook where it was and just put another piece of paper over top. And this time we're going to do the exact same thing, except we're going to incorporate the biggest rule in modern calligraphy, which is light up, hard down. You can write that down somewhere if you want to right now. Light up, hard down. So as you move your pencil in those loop-de-loops, anywhere your pencil is moving in an upwards direction, I want it to be light. And anywhere your pencil is moving in a downwards direction, I want it to be hard. You should be able to see a pretty clear difference between the two, and this means you're really gonna have to slow down. So this time, moving light up, hard down. Light up, hard down. Don't worry too much about the shape at this point. Light up, hard down. You're just really thinking about those light ups and hard downs. This is the backbone of calligraphy. Light up, hard down. And you want to be trying to keep a fluid motion as opposed to going light up, stop, hard down, stop. You want it to be nice and fluid. You're really using your arm and your wrist. Again, you can try doing some bigger, some smaller. Adjust the position of your paper if you're finding your arm is getting tight to your body. So what we're doing here is the very backbone of what you need to do with brush pens to achieve the calligraphy look. So upstrokes are light, downstrokes are hard. You could also say upstrokes are thin, downstrokes are thick. Either way. Upstrokes light, downstrokes hard. With a pencil, you can see this, but with a brush pen, it's gonna be even more defined. So if you wanna give that a try, grab whichever brush pen you're gonna be using. I'm gonna use the small pen for mine. And try that. You can also just, like, you don't have to do the loop-de-loops, you can just do a light line up and a hard line down and see what the brush pen does. You can play around with that for a couple seconds. You can try doing the loop-de-loops if you want to. Light up, hard down. It's really all about the pressure on your pen. So upstrokes are light, downstrokes are hard. And don't be afraid to hurt your pen. We'll talk about that more in a minute. If you were doing that with a big brush pen, it might look something like this. Upstrokes are light, downstrokes are hard. So if you want to pause and play with your brush pens for a few seconds, go for it. We're going to get into that a lot more, but that's it for the warm-up. So if you feel like you want to learn some more, go ahead, pause the video. We're going to move on. Okay, before we get into what I referred to earlier as the meat and potatoes of this workshop, I want to do one fun little test. So grab your brush pen, and just with what we've talked about in the first few minutes, I want you to try and write the word magic in this top space where it says before. So whatever you think calligraphy should look like, I want you to do that here. I'm not going to give you any more explanation than that. I just want you to try it out. And don't worry, because the worse it looks now, the better you're going to feel when we come back and write it at the end of the workshop. So don't put too much pressure on yourself. I'm going to give you like 1 minute to do that, and then we're going to keep going. So write that up here. I'm not even going to do it because I don't want you to copy me. But as we're sitting here, I want you to just go for it. See what comes out. This is a part where in my in-person workshops, I see people get really, really nervous about putting a pen to a paper. We haven't even talked about how to use the pens yet. So again, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just lock it in, write something, and later you're going to feel better, I promise. On this next page, we talk about actually using pens. So we're about to move on and actually put our pens to paper and learn how to do the calligraphy strokes. But before we do, you're going to want a few basic tips on how to actually hold and use brush pens, because it is a little different than holding a regular pen. So the first thing is, I'm going to grab my tracing paper here again so you can see. The first thing is I want you to hold your pen at roughly a 45-degree angle. So what that means is you don't want to hold it too straight up and down, and you don't want to hold it too sideways. You want to have your fingers just comfortably however you like to hold your pen. Generally for me, that's about here. And then you're going to hold it at a 45-degree angle to the page. So if I'm looking at it from my position, I would see this to the paper as about at a 45-degree angle. So this is the paper, this is the pen, and this angle is 45 degrees, okay? So comfortably 45, not too straight, not too narrow. You can also see that in the workbook. I have it explained right here. The next thing is to keep your pen perpendicular to the page. This one you're gonna have to catch yourself doing as you're working, but you'll notice it if you're starting to struggle that might be a big issue for you. So what I mean by that is that right now, my pen is parallel to my page. My page is running this way, my pen is running this way. What you want to do for calligraphy is turn your pen completely perpendicular to the page. So now my paper is running this way, my pen is running this way. The reason for that is if you have your pen parallel to the page like this and you try and do a downstroke, that's the thickness of the downstroke you're going to get. If you turn your pen perpendicular and you do a downstroke, you can get the belly of the brush. This makes even more of a difference when you're using a big brush pen. So I'm pushing as hard as I can right now on the pen, and that's as thick as I can get it. But if I turn my pen perpendicular, nice and thick. So that makes a huge, huge, huge difference. And if that means you need to rotate your paper more so that your arm's comfortable, go for it. Play with it now while you can, and give it a couple tries. So hold your pen perpendicular or parallel and see what happens, and then hold your pen perpendicular and see what happens, and you'll see the difference. And then the last thing it explains on this page is that light on the up and hard on the down. But other than these things on the page, I honestly encourage you to just play around with what feels comfortable to you in terms of how you hold the pen and how you position yourself as you write. And if something isn't working, just check those things we talked about, fix those, and then otherwise just adjust as you need to for your body to feel comfortable. Okay, you understand the tools, you've adjusted your posture, you've warmed up, and now you know how to use and hold a brush pen. Now let's actually write and get into what I referred to as the meat and potatoes of this workshop. Okay, so drills, basic strokes. This is the step that so many people miss when they're starting out. And it is such a crucial mistake, and I was guilty of it too. When I started wanting to learn, I literally just found someone who had beautiful calligraphy and I tried to copy it. I thought if I copied long enough and enough times that I would get the hang of it and be able to write something on my own, but no. Something always just looks off when you do that. The problem is that doing it the copying way means you're skipping actually understanding how calligraphy works. Calligraphy is not the same as cursive writing. It's not just doing cursive and then adding the light up and hard down. It's broken into strokes or pieces or drills that build up your letters. So all of these individual strokes, now we're on this page here that says basic strokes, all of these individual strokes are what turn into each and every letter of your alphabet. You just stick them together to create letters. This is going to make a bunch more sense later, but for now, just trust me. So these are the magic pieces to creating calligraphy successfully. So we're going to go through each of them and try them all together, and that's what this next page is. So I'm putting some tracing paper over top of mine, and I'm using the Tombow Fudenosuke small tip pen. I'm gonna have my pen at a 45-degree angle, and it's perpendicular to the page. The first stroke we're gonna do is the upstroke. This is the upstroke and the downstroke. They're on one line as opposed to each having their own because they're pretty straightforward. And you don't need to practice a whole line of those right away. So for your upstroke, basically, again, 45-degree angle perpendicular to the page. My arm is comfortable. You're gonna do a light line in an upwards direction on a slight curve. So starting at the bottom, pressing really lightly on the page, and going nice and slow. You're gonna hear me telling you to go nice and slow this whole time. It really is an important piece. So trace the first few, and then try and freehand a couple. So you're going from the baseline to the waistline, and you're not flicking, you're not rushing. What I tend to see happen a lot with this upstroke is people will flick. They go too fast and they flick, and you can see that those are not steady, and the ink actually looks heavier at the bottom and lighter at the top. It's not consistent. So really nice and slow from the bottom to the top. That's your upstroke. The next one is the complete opposite, and that's your downstroke. So for this one, you're starting at the waist and you're working towards the baseline. So in a full pressure stroke, this one's not a curved line, it's just a straight line. So put your pen at the top of the waistline and put a full pressure stroke down. You might notice that the strokes in the workbook are thicker than what you're creating, and that's because it just depends on the pen you're using. What I will say though is that if you're using a flexible tip brush pen and you're ending up with a line that only looks like this, you're not pressing hard enough on your pen. So don't be afraid to hurt it. They're meant to be pushed on, they're meant to be flexible. So a nice, consistent pressure the whole way from the top to the bottom. And that's your downstroke. So if you want, and the same goes for this entire workshop, if you want some more time to practice those, just pause the video. We're gonna work through each of these because, like I said, it's a short workshop and we wanna get through them all. Okay, the next one we're gonna look at is the overturn stroke. So this is going over, kind of looks like an N. You can think of it that way. And this one, you're starting here at the baseline, you're working in a light upstroke, and then you're transitioning into a hard downstroke. So I'll put my tracing paper over top, starting at the bottom, light upstroke, and as you come around the top, you're gonna push into a hard downstroke. Now, where I see people going wrong with this one is they go light up, and then they stop at the top, and they press hard down, and it ends up looking sharp at the top. We don't want that. We want a slow transition. So if you watch me on this one, light up, and as I'm coming up here around the corner, I'm starting to add pressure right at the top, right about here. So as I come around the corner, adding pressure, and by the time you get to the bottom, it's a full pressure stroke. So light up, adding pressure now, coming around the corner. Light up, hard down. And the next really, really important piece about this stroke is that they should be parallel. So these two lines should be parallel to each other. What I see happening a lot is light up, hard down on a totally different angle. So keeping that same angle consistent the whole way. And you'll notice that it's following the general guidelines on the page. So if you're having a hard time seeing those with your tracing paper, you can draw some onto your own paper so that you can follow them, or you can write directly in the workbook if you want to. So light up, hard down. The lines are parallel to each other, and the thickness is about full strength from here to here. Okay, now we're gonna do the exact opposite stroke. This one was called the overturn, this one's called the underturn. So now we're doing it upside down. And this time we're starting with the heavy stroke. So we're gonna start at the top, pressing full strength. As we come around the bottom, we're gonna let off the pressure and come up light. Again, these are parallel to each other. And you're letting go of your pressure about here. The same spot, just flipped as you did for the overturn. So full pressure, letting go, and coming up around the corner. And the slower you do this, the more perfect and gradual that transition will be. I often see people going really quickly and then they let off the pressure kind of all at once, and it looks a little more sharp and jagged here. So you want to go nice and slow and gradually let off the pressure. You can think about this as like you're breathing in on the way down and out on the way up. It's kind of like yoga breathing, but for calligraphy. Okay, so try a whole row of those ones. So that's the upstroke, downstroke, overturn, underturn. And this next one we're gonna do, which is my personal favorite stroke, it's called the compound curve. This one is kind of a combination of the overturn and the underturn. And for this one, you're gonna need to slow down even more and really concentrate on what you're doing. So from the baseline, in a light upstroke, coming around the corner, adding pressure, releasing pressure, and coming back up. So now all three of these lines are parallel to each other. And the way in which you're adding and releasing pressure is the same as it was in those overturns and underturns. You're just kind of doing both now. So upstroke, adding pressure, releasing pressure, coming back up. So you're hardly ever in a full pressure stroke. It's really only from about here to here. The rest of the time you're thinking about transitioning. So overturn, transitioning into an underturn, and those lines are all parallel to each other. I often see people do a really good job on the tracing sections, and And then when they get off on their own, it tends to look something like this. So if that's what you just did, no problem. Very common beginner mistake. You just really have to think about it as you're coming around the corner to keep those lines parallel. You have to remind your brain as you're working through the stroke. Okay, so that is the compound curve, my personal favorite. Once you get it, and it really feels nice and fun to do that stroke. Okay, next up we have the oval, which I'm not gonna lie, is probably going to challenge you. You might want to pause the video to give yourself a couple more minutes of practice on the oval, but just know that when it looks disastrous, it's very normal for beginners. Again, in this workshop, you're not going to leave a pro, you're going to understand the basics, but then you're going to have to really practice them. So for the oval, the first most kind of unique thing about the oval is that we're starting it in a place you wouldn't really expect. And the reason for that is, let's say you started at the top of the oval in your downstroke, and then you come back up light and you try to connect those. See how you have this gap? So that's gonna be fixed by starting your oval actually over to the side. So you're gonna start on the side of the upstroke with your light line, then you're gonna transition into a thick stroke, and when you come back up, those two lines are both thin and they meet up. That's the hard part because it's really, really hard to concentrate on the shape of your oval, the pressure of your strokes, and getting those two upstrokes to meet up properly in that one spot. So this takes a lot of practice. I strongly recommend just tracing for a while with the ovals so that you get kind of the muscle memory of it. So if you're working with tracing paper, this is really easy to do. You can just slide your paper over and trace 4 more. And you can do this as many times as you need to. So really thinking about going nice and slow, starting off to the side in a light stroke, transitioning at the top, transitioning again at the bottom. And so this is really similar where you're only in a full pressure stroke from about here to here. Everywhere else you're transitioning. So light up, hard down, letting off, and coming back up light. And really thinking about making those last 2 pieces match up, which can be really tricky. Now in my full course, we go through these strokes again in like detail. So I'll go through with you like 10 of the most common things I see going wrong. And there really are that many things that can go wrong with basic strokes like this, and show you how to correct them. We don't have time for that in this workshop, but just know that it is in the full course and that we go deeper into these. So if you feel like you're not getting it right away, A, it requires a lot of practice, but B, there's kind of a bunch more tips that I can show you to help you get there. So that's the oval. Again, you might want to pause the video and take another minute or 2 to work on those, but we're going to keep moving for the purposes of keeping this workshop short and concise. Okay, the last row here is actually 2 strokes in one, but they're mirror images of each other. So we have the ascending loop and the descending loop. And I just realized on my page that this stroke should actually be up here. I'm gonna have to fix this in the workbook, but I only have this workbook to record with. So this stroke should actually be moved up. You should see it touching the ascender at the top. So I'll show you that a little clearer here. This is the ascender, the waist, the baseline, and the descender. Your ascending loop should start on the waist, come up light, and then down hard to the baseline. See what I mean? So in the workbook, it starts on the baseline and goes down to the descender. I want it to start on the waist and go up to the ascender. Hopefully that makes sense. Not a huge deal for what we're working with right now, but just in case you happen to see that and you're a bit confused, that's why it's a mishap in this workbook. It shouldn't be in yours. Okay, so for this one, we're starting on the waist. We're starting in a light upstroke, coming up to the top, transitioning into that downstroke, and then full pressure all the way down. The hard part about this one is making sure that the beginning of your stroke lands on that stem. So what I see happening a lot is something like this, where you have a little piece sticking out. We don't want that little piece sticking out. We want to make sure that it matches right up with the stem. Okay, so light up, hard down, light up, hard down. Also keeping in mind that these stems should all be fairly straight. Once they come around the corner, they're fairly straight. I see a lot of people do something that looks like this. So trying to keep them fairly straight and on the same angle as the guidelines in the workbook. The descending loop, on the other hand, is on the right spot in the workbook, and it's supposed to start at the waist and finish down at the descender. So this is how you know the ascending loop goes up to the ascender, the descending loop goes down to the descender. So this one is starting on the waist in a full pressure stroke right off the bat. So you're coming down hard and then you're coming back up to meet that stem. So full pressure, letting off, and coming back up towards the middle. And now, once you've completed these, you should be able to turn your page upside down, and the descending loop looks like an ascending loop, and the ascending loop looks like a descending loop. They're really mirror images of each other. So the more consistent you can get those, the better. Another way I like to practice them too sometimes is I will work a descending loop in between my ascending loops. So adding it in here. And this kind of helps me keep a tab on whether or not I'm being consistent with my angles. So you can kind of see here that I wasn't. Just a fun way to practice. But we've now gone through all of the basic strokes: upstroke, downstroke, overturn, underturn, compound curve, oval, ascending loop, descending loop. And if you forget any of those names, they're all on the page before. Now again, I'm gonna be really honest, you need to practice just these strokes over and over and over and over again, about 10,000 more times. In fact, my suggestion is that you do and perfect these drills for like a full month before moving on to more advanced calligraphy. And that's actually exactly what we do as a first step in my paid calligraphy course. We work on a different stroke every day in a workbook that's broken down that way. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But that's honestly because that's how important these strokes are. Because if you're consistent with these strokes, your letters will be consistent. If you're inconsistent with the strokes, your letters will be inconsistent because they're made up of these. So you will not feel happy with how your letters look until you're happy with how these strokes look. I hope that makes sense. And I know it sounds like just practicing something so silly like these little squiggles, but I promise it makes a huge difference. Practicing these over and over and over and over again is like the one thing I would scream from a mountaintop to anyone who wants to get better at calligraphy. However, for now, I do want to show you how to create letters and words so that you feel like you left this workshop understanding all the steps and, you know, having a full picture of what it looks like to learn calligraphy. But before we do, I just need you to promise me that you will not jump to letters after this workshop. You're going to practice your drills. You're not just going to jump right into trying to create a whole alphabet even though you haven't perfected your drills, okay? Pinky promise. Pinky promise, please. I'm going to assume you're pinky promising me in the air right now and that we're good to go. Okay, letters. This is where that thing I told you about, all about how the basic strokes turn into letters, is all going to click, if it hasn't yet. I actually, in my in-person workshops, call this the light bulb moment because I can literally see somebody sitting there being like, working on the drills. And then when I show them this, it's like ping, and a light bulb just goes off over their head. So there are a few basic examples on this page. If you're on the page, it says Basic Letters 101, and we're gonna go through them. So I've put some tracing paper over top here. We're gonna work through the letter N first. So if we look at it really briefly to begin with, you recognize these strokes right away, the overturn and the compound curve. And when you stick them together, they create the letter N. Really quite straightforward, but the way that you're going to do that is you start with your overturn, remembering all the rules we talked about, that those lines are staying parallel to each other. And then you're going to add your compound curve right beside it, just touching, not super overlapping, not cramped on top of each other, just touching. So this is where tracing paper is also really nice, because I can just slide it over to where I can see the compound curve underneath and trace it through. So when you do this, you'll notice that all of these lines are now parallel to each other. And that's why it's so important for your strokes to be consistent, because if they aren't, your N is going to look wonky. If you had a compound curve, if you had a perfect overturn, but then you added your compound curve and your lines weren't parallel to each other because you didn't practice it enough, that N looks really weird. But if you've practiced your strokes and you know that these should all be parallel, it comes out looking chef's kiss, perfection. Really simple once you break it down, that all these strokes turn into the letters. So let's do another one. Let's do the letter G. This one has a slight little tweak to it, and that is that your upstroke for the first stroke of your G is going to have to be a little bit shorter, because it's going to connect to an oval. So if you didn't do that, let me demonstrate that first. If you did a full height upstroke here, and then you tried to add on your oval, hopefully you can see through my tracing paper, you're going to end up with this little tail sticking out. So what you need to do is shorten your upstroke. So upstroke is about 3/4. It could be about 1/2 to 3/4 in height. And then when you attach that to your oval, you don't see it peeking through. And then when you attach that to your descending loop, you're just touching the edge of the oval. And then you add your last upstroke. And there you have it, a perfect G. So again, it's broken down into little pieces that you've practiced over and over again. So when you stick them together, they build a perfect letter, as long as your strokes are perfect. So that's the G. And then lastly, let's do the letter H. I'm just kind of sliding my tracing paper all over the place here. So for the letter H, you have an upstroke added to an ascending loop. I didn't push those quite close enough together when I started tracing, so you can see a little gap, but that's okay. And then a compound curve. Okay, so if I were to do that freehand, I have my upstroke, and then I'm going to start my ascending loop a little bit over to the side here, about the width of the downstroke, so that when I come around, my downstroke fills in that gap and nothing looks squished together. And then same thing here, when I'm working on my compound curve, I don't want to follow the stem of this H up. I want to break away from it so that it looks nice and spread out and not squished together. I often see that happening, where we'll get something that looks like this. And I understand why, because when we learn cursive, we do learn to follow stems back up like that, but not in calligraphy. You want to break away. So these are all great, easy examples of how the strokes turn into letters, but there are some letters in the alphabet where you'll basically have to adjust some of the strokes, similar to how we did in the upstroke for the G, to make the strokes fit that letter. In my course and my workbook about lowercase letters, which is this green one, there is actually a spread at the beginning where we talk about the basic strokes and then how to modify them and some other weird strokes that you need to learn and where to practice them. But in this workbook that we're working through today, I've actually given you a spread of the entire lowercase alphabet so you can have it for later and you can practice and play around with it. But for the purposes of keeping this a quick crash course, I just want to run through and show you how some of them would be modified a little to create some of these letters, because not all of them are quite as straightforward as the ones we just did. Okay, let's just start with the letter A, even though this is a pretty simple one. This is really similar to the G that we just did. So again, for the upstroke, when you're connecting to an oval, you end it a little bit early. And then we're gonna do an oval, and then we're gonna do an underturn. The A is pretty simple to break down. When we move over to the B though, you'll notice right away that there's a different stroke in there that you haven't seen. So for this one, the upstroke and the ascending loop are standard. But then this piece on the B, you've never seen before. This is an example of one of the strokes that you would kind of learn and modify. And this is very much a modern calligraphy stroke. So for this one, it's really just kind of understanding the light up and hard down and following the shape and getting to know the shape. And that's how you would create the B. You'll see that stroke repeat again in the letter P. So that would be the exact same shape right here. And that's what you'll often see happen. You'll modify one and then you'll use it in multiple letters. Another example of one that's not exactly the strokes, but that you can break down if you know the strokes, is the letter C. So for this one, you're doing your upstroke, but shortening it again because you know you're connecting it to a rounded letter. And instead of doing, like, let's act as if we're creating an oval. We're starting off to the side, we're coming up, back down, but instead of bringing that upstroke to connect to your oval, you bring it up into the finishing stroke, the finishing upstroke here. So you can pretend that this is an oval on the C. The letter D, again, another pretty straightforward one with a little twist. So an upstroke shortened to connect to the oval. And then you're gonna start your ascending loop as you normally would, come back down with your stem, but then you're gonna extend it into an upstroke. So this is almost like an ascending loop paired with an underturn. You're just putting them together into one stroke. Okay, so those are some examples of like really, really small tweaks that you would see in the C and the D. Some bigger ones that you would probably, you know, get to as you're working through these and be like, what the heck do I do here? The letter K has a couple strokes that are unique to the letter K. You might see them right away when you look at it. The letter R and the letter S. A couple of them just require you to understand the general shape of the strokes and the general rules of light up and hard down, and then mash them up a little, modify them a little so that they fit the letter. So let's say we're gonna do the letter K, everyone's least favorite letter, at least mine. So you'd have your upstroke, your ascending loop, and then you have two unique pieces that look like this. So you'd have one that comes like that, lift your pen, and one that comes like this. So as long as you understand the rules, the general rules, you can build up that letter. And then let's just jump over to the R and the S. So for the R, you would have your upstroke, and then you're gonna come above the waistline in a full pressure stroke and let off as you come into the middle. And you're gonna have a shortened underturn. So if you think about it, that looks like an underturn. You're just cutting off the top piece of it. Okay, so if you did that with the underturn, it would look like this. And you're just taking out that part. So upstroke, and then shortened underturn. Okay, so that's the letter R. And this is a very basic calligraphy alphabet. This is like the beginner, basic, learn this one and then modify it later kind of alphabet, which I'll talk about at the end. But basically the steps would be to learn this and then to learn how to change up your alphabet and stylize once you're really comfortable with this. And then your letters might start to look a little bit different. So I'll talk about that some more later, but you might be wondering, you know, that R looks really formal. It doesn't always look really formal in modern calligraphy. This is just kind of the basic one that you learn first. Same kind of idea with the letter S. Upstroke, and then you're going to come a little bit above the waistline and do this squiggly stroke that you won't see anywhere other than the S, and then another upstroke. So some of them are quite strange in the way that they're built, but a lot of them are just like, most of them are built up of the strokes and you just modify them. The only other one that I want to really show you, because there's a stroke in it that will repeat in a lot of the letters, is the letter O. So for the letter O, you would do your shortened upstroke, your oval, and then what's called a comma dot. So here you're going full pressure and release. And that's what allows you to connect your O to the next letter. So what it looks like on its own is just full pressure on the left, letting off and coming over to the right. It's like a little tiny U. Okay, so you'll see that on other letters like V and W. The V would be just a compound curve and a comma dot. Okay, so with that information, when you are able to pair together the strokes and understand that some of them need to be modified a little bit, you can really work through the whole alphabet and understand how these letters are built. Now, like I said, in the full course in my workbook, we go through every single letter and it breaks down exactly what the strokes are, and it gives you opportunity to practice them all. There's just not enough time for every letter in this workbook, but I hope that just showing you the basics of how they're added together is really helpful. All right, next I want to briefly show you this next step, which is how to connect those letters you just made into words. So in a nutshell, if you look at this first part on the Connections 101 page, you use the finishing stroke from your first letter to become the entrance stroke for your next letter. So for this A to B connection, for example, we would look at the A broken down and the B broken down, and the A has an upstroke at the end that can connect it to the B. So we don't need the upstroke on the B, we can get rid of that, and we just use that underturn from the A and connect right into the B. So this means as you're writing, you're basically always thinking of what letter comes next and adjusting for it. So if we give that letter A to B a try, it would look like this. Just using this underturn and jumping right into the ascending loop for the B. If we look at the next one though, the letter A to the letter D is slightly trickier, but it's still very simple. So if we look at this, we know that when we connect an upstroke to an oval, which is the first piece of the letter D, we have to shorten the upstroke. So when we do that with the A, we have to shorten the upstroke on the underturn to connect it to the D. So that would look like shortening this upstroke, knowing it's connecting to this oval to build my A. And then as I'm working through this one, I know, oh, I'm connecting to an oval. I should end that early. Connect to an oval. And then finish the rest of the D as usual. Okay, so two really, really simple examples, but you can see how you're always thinking about exactly what the next letter is going to be and how to adjust the upstroke from the previous letter to connect to it. Let's say you wanted to connect something like an A to a Y, for example. This is where you kind of end up with new strokes that you haven't seen before that you, again, just have to adjust for the circumstance. So if I was going to do an A to a Y, I'm just going to use some of the guideline that I can see through here. It would look something like this: upstroke, oval for my A, and then as I'm working through this, I know that my A is connecting to a Y, and my Y starts with a compound curve. So to connect my underturn to a compound curve, I actually end up with that stroke that looks like this, which is kind of wonky, but it makes sense when I'm adding on the rest of the letter Y. See what I mean? So connections get a little bit tricky. So drills are tricky, and then adding the letters from the drills is trickier, and then adding the connections from the letters is trickier. So you need to make sure that you have the foundation of all the steps before, until you get, so that when you get into this stuff, it doesn't blow your mind. Now, in the connections workbook, which is the next step in my series, we go through all of these wonky strokes like this. So you'll see them all laid out for you, and it makes a lot more sense in your mind when you can kind of see them all like that. And in the connections workbook, it actually comes with a bonus that shows you how to connect every letter in the alphabet to each other. It's like a big giant chart, and it's like A to L, and you can go like this and see how the A connects to the L. That's besides the point. I'm just very proud of that little bonus I made. But all of that to say that connections are another level of tricky. So this is the basic that we went through. You think about what the next letter is going to be and you adjust that upstroke, but sometimes it can get really tricky. I feel like I've said the word tricky like 6,000 times in this workshop. Hopefully that doesn't discourage you. Calligraphy is really fun. It can also be really tricky, but when you work it out, it's satisfying. So anyway, the next page in our workbook is just a blank worksheet, and I wanted to use this to write a couple words together and give you a feel for how writing words would look. So we're just going to do a couple really, really basic words, and I want you to do them alongside me, even if you're not feeling super confident in your strokes and your letters. So the first one, I just thought of a couple words that are easy to demonstrate with connections. The first one we're going to write is mama. Mama, I'm a mama now. So that pops into my mind freshly. Okay, so to do this together, we're gonna start, you're just gonna copy the strokes alongside me, okay? So overturn, remembering that those lines are parallel, and then another overturn. And remember that when you're building these letters together, you're not following the lines, you're kind of breaking apart, spreading apart your strokes as much as you can. And now for this next one, this is where I'd be thinking, okay, I need to finish my M, but I also need to think about my next letter being an A. So now I know I need a compound curve, but I know I'm connecting it to an oval for the A. So I'm going to shorten my compound curve a little bit. And then when I add on my oval for the A, it doesn't stick out. Okay, and then same thing here. I'm thinking I got to finish my A, but I'm connecting to an M, so I need an overturn. So this stroke that I just did right here, you haven't seen before. It's like an upside down compound curve, or a backwards compound curve. So instead of going light up, hard down, light up, you're going hard down, light up, hard down. And that's just one of those strokes that you're going to learn when you start connecting letters. So now we have the connection for our next M. We can do our overturn. And then same thing again, we know we're connecting the M to an A. So shortening that upstroke and adding on the oval, finishing with another underturn. And there you go, you've written a word, a whole real word. So that's mama. The next kind of quick, easy word I thought of to write was cat. I think you can maybe see a theme with where my brain is at right now. There's a cat sitting right behind the camera. You can't see him, but he's been there this whole time. So let's write the word cat. So for this one, you're going to start with a shortened underturn again, because you know you're connecting to a rounded letter. You're going to do your C, and I know I'm connecting to an oval for the A, so I'm shortening my C again. Adding on the oval for the A, underturn, and then I'm coming up extra high, and instead of doing, different people will say different things. You could do an ascending loop for your T, just a thinner one, and cross it. Personally, I prefer just a straight line for my T. So I would just come up to the ascender line, full pressure stroke all the way down into an underturn, and then cross my T. Okay, so 2 pretty simple words so far. Look at you, you know how to do calligraphy now. And then I thought maybe we would write the sentence like, hello, my name is, And I might work through this one a little bit quickly, so you can pause the video as you need to. But hello, my name is, and I'm gonna write Becca, and you can try and write your own name if you want to. And you'll notice as we do this that I'm writing everything in lowercase letters. The reason for that is that uppercase letters are their own full beast, and we're not even gonna touch on them in this workshop. I have a workbook and a course for those, but they're just, they don't really follow the same rules, and they'll just confuse you at this point. So we're skipping uppercase letters. I remember not learning them for a really long time. In fact, I one time wrote my husband a love note, and I wrote his name on the front of it and didn't put a capital R on the name. And he was like, "That's rude. Don't you know you're supposed to capitalize somebody's name?" I was like, "Just read the love note. It's fine." Anyway, couldn't do capital letters for a long time. So we're just going to skip those. So we're going to write the word hello. So you know how to do an H. Okay, and now I'm thinking, okay, I'm connecting to an E, so I have to end my H a little bit earlier. Add on my E. Ascending loop into an underturn. Ascending loop into an underturn. And I know I'm connecting to an oval for the O, so I ended it a little early. Add on my oval, and then add on my comma dot. There you go, you have the word hello. Now let's write my. You know how to do the M now. Overturn, overturn. And now I'm thinking, how am I going to connect my M to a Y? There you go. That like humpy thing that we looked at earlier. Now, when you get to the connections workbook in my series, you'll notice that we also have some modifications for this, because I always find this looks a little much. It looks a little bit bulky. So what I do instead is I would change up my Y. I would just do this compound curve, and then my Y would be an underturn and a descending loop, instead of a Y that begins in a compound curve. So these are all things like little tiny tweaks that we get into in the full course. But for now, you can do either one of those my's. Now let's write name. So overturn, compound curve ended early for the A. Upside or backwards compound curve, we can call it. That one up here that we did. Overturn, overturn, ending early, compound curve ending early for the E. Okay. And I'm going to do the tricky S in a second that we looked at earlier. So just follow along as best you can. It's no big deal if you're not liking the way this looks right now. So for the I, we're going to do an upstroke all the way up and an underturn, and just dot your I. Then we're going to come above the waist and do that wonky stroke and an upstroke. And then I'm going to write Becca. You can try and write your name, or you can pretend your name is Becca so that you can just copy along with me. So upstroke, ascending loop, and this one again, I know I'm connecting to an E, so I'm going to end it a little early. I know I'm connecting to a C, end it early. Another C, end it early. And an A, again, end it early. And there you have it. Hello, my name is Becca. So hopefully you're happy with the way your hello, my name is turned out, or you can pause the video right now and keep working on it. If I went way too fast for you, I totally understand. The very last word I want to show you how to do is the word minimum. And this is a really good one to practice when you want to see how consistent you're being with your strokes. So once you've practiced your strokes a bunch, I challenge you to write the word minimum a whole bunch of times and see how consistent you're being. You'll see why in a second. So if we write minimum, overturn, overturn, compound curve, backwards compound curve, compound curve, backwards compound curve, overturn, compound curve, underturn, backwards compound curve, overturn, compound curve. And then you can dot your eyes. And I think you understand what I mean. As I did that, you kind of have to really, really think about what is coming next and try and think about all of these lines being perfectly parallel to each other. I think I did a pretty good job there. It's like I've done this before 7 million times. Okay, and lastly, while we're at making words, let's go back to that page where I challenged you to write the word magic. And we're gonna write it again together, piece by piece. I'm gonna use this same piece of tracing paper I have been using just to save paper. But you can go back to the original one you'd use so that they're stacked on top of each other if you want, or you can write them directly in your workbook. I don't know what you chose to do at the beginning. So I'm gonna do this one nice and slowly so you can do it with me and make it look as nice as possible so you feel accomplished, okay? So starting on the baseline in an overturn, light up, hard down, okay? Overturn. Same thing one more time. Trying to make those look as identical as possible. Then we're gonna do a compound curve that we're gonna end early, connecting to an oval for the A. Then we're gonna connect the oval. Then we need an underturn, ended early, connecting to the oval for the G. Oval for the G is next. Then we're going to do our descending loop, so just grazing the edge of that oval, coming down to the descender and back up. Then we're adding an upstroke all the way up to the waist. An underturn for the I, ended a little bit early because we know we're connecting to a C. You can dot your I now or after, whatever floats your boat. And then adding on the C and bringing it all the way back up to the waistline. Magic. And if you want to, full pressure stroke and a dot for an exclamation mark. Hopefully you can see how much better that already looks. I would love, 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 love to see your comparison of these together if you want to snap a picture and share it with me. It's all written right here how you can tag me on social media, but I would love for you to post a picture and tag me. Or you can even email it to us, hello@thehappyevercrafter.com, and I'll take a peek at it. I love seeing these, so please, I would love to see it. All right, I promised you at the start of this workshop that I was going to tell you exactly what your roadmap should be if you hopefully enjoyed this and want to keep going. And if you want to learn how to take these basics and run with them to create your own style and all that jazz. By now, I think you know that my #1 piece of advice is to just practice the drills first, over and over and over again for a long time, like longer than you think you need to, because over time it's going to become such strong muscle memory that it'll be second nature. And when you go to create letters and words and connections, you're going to be so much happier with it. So the order you want to go in for learning all of this is pretty much exactly what we did together today, but with some more pieces added in. So #1 is the drills. #2 is lowercase letters. #3 is uppercase letters, which we didn't even touch on today because, as I said, they're their own beast. #4 is connections into words. #5 is stylizing. and number 6 is flourishing. I'd say those are like the buckets of things you want to learn in the order that you should learn them. So I think you probably gathered this, but I have an entire bundle of courses that covers these exact steps. It's 6 courses plus a bunch of bonuses. It's usually $189, but obviously as part of this workshop, I wanted to give you a limited time offer to grab it on massive sale for $99. So it's $99 for all of these. The whole course, the whole bundle, all the workbooks, all the videos, everything. And I'm gonna show them all to you. I have them all right here. But if you're already like, okay, I'm gonna probably want to check into this and look at them all in more detail, just go to thehappyevercrafter.com/bundle while we're talking about it. If you want to have that open, you can check it out. So as a little background, because it'll give this some more context, this course used to run live where a bunch of people would all join all at once, and we would work through one of these workbooks and courses essentially every month. Now though, I've restructured it in a way that you can go through it solo on your own, DIY at your own pace, whatever pace you want, but the order of everything and all the content is still exactly the same. So you buy the bundle and then you log in, you get a workbook, a course, and you work through each one in order to build on your skills. So each one is a full workbook as well as its own course inside of a hosting platform called Teachable, which is full of modules with walkthrough videos, explanation videos, extra help videos, and a ton of other helpful content. So in here, you'll find all sorts of bonuses too, like a full extra free workbook about numbers and symbols, as well as a giant printable chart with the connections of every letter available in the alphabet, a bunch of videos where I've even taken past student work and critiqued it to help point out beginner issues, and so much more stuff like that. It's all jam-packed into each of these courses. So I do quickly want to show you inside of each of these workbooks too though, because if you're like me, you want to know exactly what you're buying. So I'm going to walk you through each of the workbooks in this bundle. So the first step, as you know, is to do the drills. Now this workbook is unique in that it's broken down by weeks and days. So my suggestion when you start this is to do your drills for a month. And I know I mentioned that earlier, but this workbook is built in a way that you can do that. So every day you would come, you would log into your Teachable account, you'd see the video for that stroke and that day. It gives you all the tips and tricks for each of the strokes at the beginning. And then every day is broken down into week 1, day 1, week 1, day 2, and it's all a different stroke every day. And then as you work through the workbook, you have less and less tracing. So we do all tracing for the first week, a little less tracing for the second week, even less tracing for the third week. And by the fourth week, you're doing hardly any tracing and you're just freehanding them. This is such a good way to learn the drills and to really cement them before you move on to the next workbook, which is lowercase letters. I showed you a little bit of this one during the workshop, but there's basically an intro at the beginning. Then we talk about how to modify the strokes that you need to. And then we literally just go through every letter of the alphabet, all broken down into pieces. So you trace them all separately, then you freehand them separately, then you draw them one after the other, and then you touch them together to form the letter, and you practice them over and over again. So it has every letter of the alphabet. Very similar thing when you get to uppercase letters. So this workbook is very similar to the lowercase letters. At the beginning, we go through some intro stuff. And then in this one, there are 2 different styles of uppercase letters. So let me find the first page. Okay, so there's a formal style and there's a casual style. So you can try both versions of all the different uppercase letters. So for example, this is the letter A in the formal style, and this is the letter A in the casual style. And it's very similar to the other workbook where we go through each of the strokes individually, then you freehand them, then you trace them all together, and you freehand them and practice a bunch of times. So it has 2 versions of every letter of the uppercase alphabet. The third workbook is the letter connections, which I also showed you a little bit of earlier, but it goes through some intro to connection stuff, and then we go through all sorts of different connections. So there's the basic stuff, then there's the tricky ones, how to do that and how to deal with all the trickiest letter connections like M's and N's. O's are really hard, B and P are hard, V and W, like there, it goes through all the hardest ones. And then we talk about how to connect uppercase letters, how to do some words and all that kind of stuff. Again, with this one, it comes with that big giant chart of how to connect every letter to each other. That's inside the Teachable course with all the videos and everything. And then the next one after that is Bouncing and Stylizing, which is everybody's favorite workbook. This is where you take your skills and you start to really turn it into your own style. So we talk about some general guidelines, and then I go through some of the really quick game changers, some do's and don'ts for bouncing, and then there's a bunch of templates of different styles you can bounce. There's essentially three different styles that I walk you through in here, how to do each one, with lots of examples and different ways to try and find your own styles as well. You're not just copying these ones. And then the very last workbook is Flourishing, which is again another form of stylizing. So you start to add flourishes to your words. If you've never seen what flourishing is, it's basically adding things like this onto your letters, filling in space with some pretty swirls. So we do some do's and don'ts, then we do some warm-ups and some practice. We go through every letter of the alphabet and how you could add a flourish to it, with lots of practice sheets and traceables, and how to do flourishing on uppercase letters as well. And then we do a bit at the end of how to do layouts and how to add flourishing in layouts. So from start to back, you're going from the very, very, very basics to the letters, to the connections. And then once you have a grasp on how to do the basics, you start stylizing it and you come up with your own style by the end, and you can create full layouts with full flourishes and stylistic stuff. So again, if you want all the info, or if you want to grab the $99 sale in the next 48 hours, the info is all actually on this page right below where you're watching this video right now. So you can scroll down, but you can also find it at thehappyevercrafter.com/bundle. And that discount will expire on that page in the next 48 hours. So if you think you want it, go check it out. All the questions should be answered there. But if you need any help, you can email hello@thehappyevercrafter.com and we'll help you. Okay, enough salesy stuff. I truly hope you got value out of this workshop and you're leaving here feeling like you've accomplished something right off the bat. To me, again, the most important thing you can do is practice those basics over and over and over again. After that, even if you don't grab the bundle and work through it with us, I suggest that you learn in that same order I talked about, so that you're doing things in the right steps and you don't frustrate yourself. Thank you again so much for taking part in this workshop. If you liked it, I would love it if you would share with any other crafty friends who you think might enjoy a free class too. And I really, really hope I see you inside the full course. Bye for now.